What do you do when love finds you, but science warns you to walk away? Daniel and Laura were deeply in love. Everything about their connection pointed to forever, except for one invisible wall. They both carried the AS genotype. Doctors warned them. Friends pitted them. Logic said, "Let go." But faith whispered, "Hold on. This is not just a story about romance. This is a story of radical faith, divine direction, and a love that refuses to surrender." This is how Daniel and Laura dared to believe for the impossible and witnessed it with their own eyes. Daniel and Laura met during a youth leadership summit. From the first moment they spoke, there was something different, like their souls had been waiting for the meeting. They bonded over long conversations, shared ambitions, and a deep love for purpose. Everyone around them could feel the tension, the sweet kind. To most people, it was obvious love was only a breath away. But to Daniel and Laura, they were just enjoying the flow, unaware that something hidden in their blood would soon challenge everything. One evening, Laura's close friend approached Daniel with a serious tone. "Daniel, I don't mean to intrude, but Laura is AS. Are you aware of that?" The question hit Daniel like cold water. He had known his own genotype, AS, but he and Laura hadn't gotten to that point yet. His heart sank. It was the kind of information that turns dreams into dilemmas. The possibility of love was real, but so was the potential risk. And in that moment, Daniel realized the depth of the crossroads they were approaching. Laura couldn't stop the tears, not because of the discovery itself, but because of what it meant for their future. She had never connected with anyone the way she did with Daniel. And now, their budding love felt like a candle in the wind. Daniel sat alone, too, the silence in his room broken only by the paper in his hands. It read as, just like hers, no mistake, no escape. Yet, deep within both of them, something still burned, something more stubborn than fear. Hope. They agreed to retake the test. Perhaps the initial results were wrong. Maybe fate was playing a cruel trick. Sitting in the hospital lobby, side by side but barely speaking, their hearts were pounding. When the results finally came, the verdict was the same. Both were as. Reality had confirmed their fear. Still, neither could find the strength to walk away. What they shared had grown too deep. And in that moment, something inside both of them whispered, "Don't give up yet." That night, I cried. I cried like I'd never cried before. Not because I didn't love Daniel, but because love suddenly felt like a threat to destiny. But just before dawn, as I knelt beside my bed, I opened my Bible randomly, and the first verse my eyes landed on was, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Isaiah 41, verse 10. At that moment, peace flooded my heart. It didn't answer every question, but it anchored my soul. I knew then this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a higher kind of faith. After receiving the second confirmation from the hospital, Daniel and Laura sat under the same tree where they once laughed for hours. But this time, silence weighed heavily. Laura's hands trembled as she whispered, "Maybe this is where we stop." Daniel couldn't answer immediately. Everything within him wanted to fight, but he also knew what was at stake. It felt like the end of something beautiful, or the test before something miraculous. Love had brought them here, but now faith was the only thing that could carry them forward. We didn't keep our faith to ourselves. As youth leaders, we taught the teenagers under us that faith isn't weakness, it's strength. I remember telling them, the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. 2 Timothy 1, verse 7. That verse became the foundation of our ministry. If we were going to walk by faith in this matter, we couldn't afford to walk in fear. We needed God's Spirit, not just for our relationship, but for the lives we were called to lead. Lara's father had always been a man of wisdom. She feared he would oppose the relationship, but after she shared everything, he paused thoughtfully. Then he said words that would shape their future. Laura, science may always have a say, but God will always have his way. That one sentence broke the fear in her heart. It didn't mean they were careless. It meant they were covered. Her father's blessing wasn't just approval. It was confirmation. They were no longer moving based on emotion. They were moving with purpose. Together again, Daniel and Laura made a bold declaration. They weren't just hoping anymore. They were agreeing in faith. That night, they wrote down everything they believed God for. Twin boys, a daughter, and not a single child with the SS genotype. It sounded foolish to some, even dangerous. But for them, it was their covenant with God. They knew the risks. They were both medically trained. But they also knew the voice of the one who had called them. And when he calls, he also makes a way. 1 year later, on Lara's birthday, Daniel made it official. Under the soft glow of string lights, surrounded by loved ones who had walked the journey with them, he got on one knee and asked a question that had lived in both their hearts all along. Her, yes, echoed with tears, laughter, and a kind of courage not many understand. It wasn't just a proposal. It was a victory cry. Over fear, over statistics, over everything that had tried to tell them it was impossible. Their wedding wasn't just about two people becoming one. It was a declaration of destiny. Daniel and Laura stood before friends, family, and heaven itself, boldly stepping into what many said was foolish. But there was nothing foolish about faith. Their vows were not ordinary. They included scripture, promises of purpose, and a shared vision to live beyond themselves. As they were pronounced husband and wife, a quiet whisper seemed to settle over the crowd. This union is not by chance. It is a sign. Their new home wasn't grand, but it was theirs, the beginning of something sacred. They painted the walls with laughter, filled the rooms with dreams, and built altars of prayer in every corner. In the quiet moments, they spoke life into their future children, calling them by name even before they were conceived. Every time fear tried to sneak in, they reminded themselves of the word. They didn't ignore reality. They simply chose to live above it. It happened one ordinary morning. A single line turned into two. Laura sat frozen, staring at the test as the reality settled in. She was pregnant. Daniel ran to her, heart pounding with a mixture of awe and anxiety. But even in that moment, they knew this child was not an accident. He was the fruit of their agreement, the first chapter in the story God was writing. They held each other in silence. No words, just faith, loud, burning, and unshakable. From the very first checkup, doctors reminded them of the risks. They recommended tests, procedures, even options. But Daniel and Laura remained gentle yet firm. They weren't in denial. They were anchored. Every appointment was followed by prayer. Every test result was met with thanksgiving. Even when uncertainty tried to creep in, their walk wasn't without fear. It was faith in the face of fear. They chose not to just react medically, but respond spiritually. Every heartbeat heard was a reminder God is keeping his word. Nothing could have prepared them for what the doctor said that day. You're having twins. Daniel nearly dropped the sonogram printout. Laura covered her mouth in disbelief. They laughed. They cried because they had written it down, declared it, believed for it. And now here it was, not just a promise fulfilled, but a divine signature. God didn't just show up, he showed off. The same twins they had prayed for in faith were now growing inside her. Every kick was a miracle. Every scan was a testimony. As Lara's belly grew, so did the questions, not from strangers, but from loved ones. Her parents, though supportive, were cautious. Are you sure this is wise? What if... But Daniel never flinched. He held Lara's hand and answered, not with pride, but with peace. They weren't trying to convince anyone anymore. They simply walked in what they knew. Lara's parents watched in silence as their daughter radiated a glow no fear could explain. Slowly, their doubts began to melt into wonder. One night, the enemy struck. Lara was gripped by pain that left her breathless. Daniel rushed to her side, heart pounding, not knowing what to do. But instinct took over. He fell to his knees and cried out, not a prayer of panic, but of authority. He declared every word spoken over their children. He spoke life where pain tried to whisper death. And as dawn broke, the pain vanished. Lara opened her eyes and smiled weakly. He tried, she whispered, but he lost. That moment sealed their covenant of faith. With every passing week, Daniel felt an urge to write, not for himself, but for his sons. In quiet moments, he poured his heart into a letter. He told them of the war fought before they arrived, of the love that birthed them, and the God who made them possible. You are not accidents. You are answers. You are testimonies wrapped in skin. He tucked the letter into a sealed envelope and placed it in their baby drawer. One day, they would read it and understand. They were born into purpose. It was the moment of truth, the final scan before delivery. Lara lay still, her heart racing as the screen flickered. Daniel stood by her, his hand trembling in hers. The doctor scanned in silence, then slowly broke into a grin. Both babies are healthy. Everything looks perfect. Tears flowed freely down Lara's cheeks. She had no words, just gratitude. Daniel leaned down and whispered, "This is God's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." The promise was still intact. Labor was intense, more intense than they imagined. The room was filled with tension, machines beeping, nurses giving instructions. Lara screamed, not just in pain, but in warfare. Daniel stayed close, whispering scriptures, holding her hand, refusing to let fear take root. Every contraction was a declaration. Every push, a breaking of chains. And then, crying. 2 cries. Twins alive, full of life, full of promise. The room broke into applause, but Daniel and Lara just wept. Not from exhaustion, but from victory. They held him for the first time, tiny, warm, alive. David and Daniel Jr., the names had been chosen long before the birth. These weren't just babies. They were living evidence that what God promises, He performs. The room felt still, almost sacred. No machines, no chaos, just a quiet cry of answered prayers. Daniel whispered, "Welcome, boys. The world has been waiting for you." Lara smiled. "You were born of faith, and you will live by it." Days later, the results came in. The hospital ran standard genotype tests for the twins. Daniel took the envelope with steady hands, though his heart raced. He opened it slowly. 1, then 2. Both boys, AA. No sickle cell trait. No carrier status. Just pure, divine rewriting of what science expected. Lara broke down, hugging him tight. It wasn't just a miracle. It was a message. What science expected, God overruled. This was the moment they would remember forever. They shared the news, and it spread like wildfire. Friends who once doubted were now stunned. Parents who feared, now praised. The same voices that once said, "Be careful," now whispered, "God is real." People started calling them the couple who defied the odds. But Daniel and Lara didn't boast in themselves. They pointed everyone back to God. "This isn't our story," Daniel said. "It's His glory." The testimony was already traveling beyond borders. They visited Lara's hometown, so her father could finally meet the boys. The old man took one look at his grandsons and chuckled. Science had its say, but God had his way. He held them, prayed over them, and blessed them. That day, the family gathered around, hands joined, grateful hearts lifted. The past pain was swallowed by present joy. Laura leaned into Daniel and whispered, "Now they see what we saw. Faith was never blind. It always knew the end." It was time to share, not just on calls or with friends, but publicly. They stood on a church stage and told it all, from genotype fears to divine confirmations. Every detail, every tear, every promise kept. The crowd stood to their feet. Some wept, others prayed. A young couple in the back held hands tightly, hope reborn in their eyes. Daniel said, "We didn't just believe for us. We believe for everyone who would one day hear this." And that day, many began believing again. After the twins' birth, Daniel and Laura felt a new calling. They weren't just parents. They were now witnesses. As certified relationship coaches, they began hosting sessions for couples, not to push decisions, but to guide with experience. They shared their story with wisdom and humility. "We're not against science," Laura would say. "We just know of a higher law." Young couples leaned in, not to argue, but to understand how faith and wisdom could walk hand in hand. But not everyone celebrated their story. Online, the backlash began. Critics called them reckless, irresponsible, lucky at best. Laura read the comments, her heart sinking. But Daniel reminded her of what mattered. Truth doesn't need everyone to believe it, just enough to be changed by it. They didn't argue online. They simply lived their truth, one joyful day at a time, because their lives were proof. That faith, when genuine, produces fruit. One evening, a knock on their door changed everything. A young couple, both AS, stood trembling. "We were about to break up until we saw your video." They had come not for advice, but for hope. Daniel and Laura listened, prayed, and shared. They didn't tell them what to do. They told them how they trusted God with every step. By the end of the night, the couple left not with answers, but with peace. Their story had become someone else's starting point. The twins' first birthday arrived, and it wasn't just a celebration. It was an altar. Family and friends gathered to honor what God had done. Laughter filled the room, but behind the smiles were stories of sleepless nights, silent prayers, and supernatural peace. As they sang the birthday song, Laura looked at the candles, then at Daniel. "A year ago, this felt impossible," she whispered. He replied, "That's what makes it holy." They blew out the candles together. Not a wish, but a thank you. As the boys grew, Daniel and Laura knew it wasn't enough to just live the miracle. They had to pass it on. So they told the boys their story in simple, childlike words. "Before you were born, we had to believe." The boys listened, eyes wide with wonder, unaware of the battles fought on their behalf. Laura tucked them in, whispered a prayer, and smiled. One day, they would fully understand. But for now, their hearts were being formed in faith, just like their parents once were. Months later, during a routine checkup, a senior doctor reran the twins' genotype results out of curiosity. When the reports came back A, the doctor paused, reviewed the parents' genotype history, and asked, "How did this happen?" Laura smiled and simply replied, "We believed." The doctor shook his head, not in doubt, but in awe. He said, "Science cannot explain this, but I can't deny it either." Even medicine had to nod in reverence to what faith had done. That night, Daniel wrote a letter, not to a person, but to their future. He detailed the tears, the retreat, 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, the lab results, the backlash, and the blessing. Laura added her own words. In case we ever forget, here's proof that God doesn't just speak, he fulfills. They sealed the letter in a keepsake box for their sons to open when they turned 18. Because some stories aren't just for remembering, they're for inheriting. Their story, once whispered between friends, now echoed across continents. A video testimony went viral. Emails, DMs, comments from strangers flooded in, some praising, some questioning, but many deeply moved. Couples in different corners of the world began seeking God in new ways. Faith had found new soil to grow. Daniel and Laura were overwhelmed, not by fame, but by purpose. If our pain birthed someone else's faith, then none of it was in vain. Daniel returned to the retreat grounds where the whole journey began. The same silence, the same sky, but everything else had changed. He stood still, whispering, 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, life through the Spirit. Then he turned and saw Laura walking toward him with the twins. The picture was full circle. Not just a marriage redeemed, not just children born, but a covenant kept. Heaven had signed their story, and they had kept the faith. Their story didn't end. It evolved. Daniel and Laura now live to remind the world that faith isn't blind. It sees the invisible and walks toward it. They didn't deny science. They simply leaned on a superior reality. 3 children later, each healthy, joyful, and loved, they continue to coach, lead, and testify. And every time someone asks, but what if it didn't work? Daniel gently smiles and replies, but what if it does? The miracle wasn't just in the outcome, it was in the obedience. 1 year after their story went viral, Daniel and Laura were invited to speak at a national faith and family conference. They stood before thousands, not as celebrities, but as vessels. Their voices trembled, not with fear, but with reverence. They shared every step, the love, the risk, the prayer, and the promise. The crowd listened, many holding hands tighter than before. One couple whispered, if they could walk through fire and not burn, maybe we can too. The people who once worried the most now became their loudest cheerleaders. Lara's father held the twins and wept silently. Science may have a say, he whispered again, but God always has his way. Daniel's mother smiled. Your marriage didn't just birth children. It birthed testimonies. In that moment, it wasn't just Laura and Daniel's faith being celebrated. It was the quiet prayers of parents who stood in the gap. In 2nd grade, the twins were asked to share their family history. Most kids spoke of grandparents and favorite meals. But these two, they told of love, doctors, tests, and a God who rewrote laws. Their classmates listened, wide-eyed. Their teachers stood silent, visibly moved. Never be ashamed of your beginning, Laura had told them. You didn't come from chance. You came from covenant. That day, 2 little boys became storytellers of something sacred. With each passing year, their assignment deepened. Daniel began mentoring teens who were losing faith in love, in purpose, in themselves. He taught them that faith wasn't just for old people or desperate prayers. It was for life. The Spirit gives life, he'd say. Don't just know it, live it. Teens left those sessions feeling braver, because this wasn't just theory, it was tested truth. Laura turned their testimony into legacy. Her book, What If It Works?, hit shelves and hearts alike. It wasn't a medical guide, it was a spiritual blueprint. She wrote about love that refused to fear, and a God who fulfilled promises. The book sold out in days, not because of marketing, but because it carried oil. People were hungry for more than logic. They wanted proof that God still moves. And they found it page after page. 10 years later, Daniel stood outside the hospital where the crisis began. It looked smaller now, but not because it had changed. He had grown. He whispered a prayer of gratitude, not to forget what happened, but to honor it. Faith didn't exempt him from reality. It simply made the impossible possible. And he knew, if he had to choose again, he would still walk that same road hand in hand with Laura and Faith. Their story didn't end with them. Across nations, couples who once feared the future now held babies of promise. Some had chosen to wait. Some had pursued IVF. Others, like Daniel and Laura, leaned into faith. But all had hope. Their inbox flooded with letters. Each one a seed their journey had watered. They were no longer just a couple. They had become a movement. To the couple whose hearts are breaking right now, we see you. To the man wondering if he should walk away. To the woman who feels torn between love and wisdom, we've been there. We're not here to give you advice. We're here to remind you. Seek God. Trust Him. Wait for Him. If He leads you into it, He will carry you through it. We're not promising our path is yours, but we are saying miracles still happen. You're not crazy for believing. This is not just a love story. It's not even just a faith story. It's a legacy story, one that proves faith doesn't just move mountains, it moves generations. If this testimony has stirred something in your spirit, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Echoes Africa Stories, for more real-life stories that restore hope and ignite faith. There are people waiting for what only your testimony can unlock. Join the movement. Faith still works. Miracles still happen, and your story might just be next.